I'm going to bounce back to my main screen, so hopefully. So welcome to Computerside Chat. I'm excited to have you all here. Today, the idea is that we are going to kind of have a book club with no reading on this book. What? Teaching for Learning. This idea was born out of what happened to me in grad school. And I remember back when I was in graduate school, my advisor would sometimes come and he would plop a stack of journals on my desk. And he would say, I don't have time to read all of these, but you do. So read them and summarize them for me before I go to this conference so I can be all prepared and ready to go. And it occurred to me that my teaching colleagues are very busy, just like my advisor was, and maybe I could help out by sharing a summary of a great book. So I could do basically what I did in grad school for my colleagues, and that's really how this idea was born. You are joining in on the second Computerside chat, but it's still the first session, really. We're going to be covering chapters 1 and 2, and each month we're going to cover 2 new chapters. We have 2 opportunities to join in. So, so I'm glad that you guys are all here, and I'm excited to move forward with it. So as we get started, I just want to make sure that everybody's connected via audio. You can use your computer mic or you can use your phone. And Milan is here. You can chat at any time by typing into the chat window. Just make sure it's going to everyone, and he can help you out. So if something happens or gets weird, we've got some support for you, so please take advantage of that. For now, we're going to keep everybody muted while I do some introductory stuff, and then we're going to have a lot of opportunities for discussion. So if you want to talk, just unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone next to your name in the participant window, and then you'll be able to talk, and then you can mute yourself again afterwards. It just keeps the ambient noise down, and that we find is a good thing. Milan, is everybody in that you, okay, all right, so I think we're good to go. I do want to make sure that I give everybody professional development credit for attending, so please take a minute to go ahead and chat in your ACC email address and your name, so we have that as a record, and then we can give everybody credit. So if you take a minute to do that, and I'll just check my chat window to make sure everybody's in. Great, thank you, Terry, we've got you. Sandra, I've got you as well, and Marissa, and Joelle, look good. They're coming to me privately. Okay. Yeah, you guys, if you can chat in the chat window, there's an option where it says send to, and there's a little arrow. Click on that arrow, and then you should be able to choose from any member of our group. But you're going to want to pick the one that says everyone. It's up at the very top. You may have to scroll. But go ahead and chat in to everyone. That way, Milan can collect your chats, because otherwise they're going to scroll off my screen and I won't have access to them. Okay. So Milan just encouraged me to remind you guys all that if you have a question or you want to talk, please unmute yourself. We're not trying to keep you quiet. We're just trying to keep the background noise to a minimum. So anytime you have something you want to say, just unmute yourself and then we'll be able to hear you. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm just checking on my time. Let's see. So here's how this session is going to work. We're going to be covering chapters 1 and 2 today. Chapter 1 is on lecture as a method, and chapter 2 is on discussion methods. For each chapter, we're going to briefly discuss the research. I think since we've got a larger group this time, I'm probably going to cut back on some of the slides that I prepared, but I'll make them all available to you guys after the session's over, so you'll get to see everything. But I want to make sure that I have time to hear what you guys have to say. And with this many people, I think I want to give a little more time for that. So I'll discuss the research with you guys, and then each chapter has what they call ideas in addition to the research, and those are actual tips that you can use in class. So I'll share a few of those. I think each chapter has about 15, and we're going to do just about 7 total. So we're not going to get through all of them, but maybe it's a teaser. Maybe you pick up the book and take a peek at some point at the other ones. And then I'm going to challenge you guys to select a favorite idea or a favorite activity to use in class, and then encourage you guys to share how you think you could use it in your course, because sometimes the little tweaks that we put on these ideas are actually more valuable than just what's in the book alone. And so last time I really enjoyed hearing how people thought they could use these ideas in their classes specifically, and the little spin that they would use to make it more personal. So we're going to have opportunities to discuss and vote and share your thoughts throughout, so it won't just be me the whole time. And that's really the way it's going to go. We'll start with chapter 1, and then we'll do the same with chapter 2. So this is the first session of its kind. It's a lie now. This is really the second, but I really do encourage you, chat in with feedback, or if you can't hear me, or if there's something that you would like me to repeat or spend less time on. This is all about making this useful for you guys. So, has anybody joined us since we did our first intro?
Helena has.
Oh, hi, Helena. Welcome. Okay, so we are going to start out with a vote. And what I'd like you to do is make sure that your chat is set to everyone so that we can all see your responses. But what I'm interested in finding out is, we're talking about 2 chapters, lecture and discussion, but I want to know what appeals to you most. And in general, for the courses that you teach, do you think lecture is more effective? Do you think discussion is more effective, or does it depend on the topic in your class? And you can go ahead and chat in one of these underlined words so we can all see what our preferences are going into this conversation. So do you think lecture is your strong suit, or what suits your students best? Discussion, or does it depend? All right, so hopefully you guys are all able to see these chats as well. So we've got several depends, and then I'm seeing some discussion, a combo. Does anybody else want to weigh in, like a combination? Yeah, and so I like Joelle's comment a lot. It depends. You've got to get the basic information across, and then you can have that discussion to share and deepen the learning a bit. So those are some great ways to really work on this. Okay, so if anybody else wants to chat in, go ahead and do that. I am going to jump over Versa, discussion as well. So I'm going to jump into the chapters, and we're going to start with the lecture methods. Let's see. So this I just found interesting. In this book, what I really liked about it, you guys, is that it's absolutely based on research. So there's a whole lot to get through about why you might choose one method or another one. But then my favorite part is for each method, they give 5 best practices based on the research. So just some basics so we're all on the same page. Something I found fascinating was that lecture is still the predominant method of teaching in higher ed, especially in liberal arts. And you can see some numbers here they thought were kind of interesting. 81% of social science classes predominantly use lecture, and then 89% of science and mathematics courses predominantly use lecture. And I do want to say, I think there's been a lot of bad rap going around for a lecture, and it absolutely is a valuable technique, and hopefully these best practices will give you some guidance on how to make it as valuable as possible. But the idea is your wheelhouse, what you enjoy and what is helpful for you, you're probably going to do that better than anything else. So educate yourself through research to figure out the best ways to deliver the things that you like, and then challenge yourself every once in a while with some other ideas. So if anybody has any comments, please weigh in. I do not want you to feel like I'm just talking at you. But basically, this slide is just here because I thought it was kind of interesting. So I'm going to jump over. Okay. So I found this quote in the book, and I just really liked it because I do think it points out an important thing to keep in mind when you're using the lecture method. Sometimes we think just because we have said it, that our students have received it. And I always caution people to recognize that just because you have given the message doesn't mean that the message has been received. I have found very often, I think I said something to my students, I think I pointed out that this is super important, and somehow they heard something else and they glommed onto that and they thought that was the most important point. So one thing that you can really do to improve the quality of your classes when you use lecture is to constantly check in and make sure that the message you're trying to give is the message that's being received. So I just like that quote. I thought I'd encourage you guys to think about it that way. All right, so we're going to jump right into the 5 best practices, and I will share with you some research behind each one, though certainly it's not an exhaustive list. So finding number 1, using mini lectures with purposeful active learning breakouts can improve student learning. And I think this is where most of the research on lecture is going, is the idea that if you lecture for 1 hour and 15 minutes straight, or 3 hours if you've got a night class, that's probably not the best use of this form of teaching. The research suggests that student attention drops pretty sharply after 10 minutes. And so if you go on past 15 minutes or 20 minutes, you have to recognize that you're losing the attention of your audience. And so it's great to break it up. You can do voting, you can ask questions, but the idea is try not to drone on for too long. So research supports short lectures with breaks for students to process, and it's just a really good way to give your audience time to pay attention and to really be involved with attention. So I'm going to challenge you, as we're going through these findings, maybe take a note. At the end of this section, I'm going to have you guys assess yourselves on all of these. So maybe be thinking about that now. When you lecture, do you break it up? Do you do mini lectures and then give your students time? All right, so finding 2. I don't know about you guys, and chime in if you want to, but I often find that my students don't have great note-taking skills. I have been, over the last several semesters, inviting students to bring their notes with them to office hours so I can look and I can check to see were the messages I was trying to share the ones that they were picking up. And sometimes they are, but often there'll be gaps in their note-taking. So a student might write operant conditioning, super important, and then not have anything about it. So I just like to bring up to them the idea that, hey, the day you took those notes, you probably remembered something very important about operant conditioning, and that was meaningful to you at the moment, but you have to look at your notes after you've taken them and make sure that they're going to be valuable to you in 6 weeks or whenever the exam hits. So just remembering that we're not born knowing how to be great students, and aiding your students with the task of learning and becoming better students can be time well spent. Research suggests that you don't necessarily want to give students everything that you're going to cover because then they really feel this false sense of security and they feel that they don't have any work to do in the class. Instead, if you give skeletal notes or some prompts, it can make sure that they are focusing on the things you think are important, but you're not giving so much that they think there's nothing for them to do. So I just encourage you to take some time, and it doesn't take a lot of time, especially if you invite them to office hours, but to make sure you are encouraging good note-taking skills, because lecture is worthless if students aren't recording the information that you're giving. They have to have a way to interact with it later. So any comments or thoughts so far? I want to give you guys a minute to chime in. All right, so I'm going to keep going. All right. So, all right, and Belian just reminded me that don't forget, if you want to talk, just unmute and we'll hear you. So you can unmute very quickly. So we're going to go on to finding 3. This finding, I think, was surprising to me a bit. I love when I talk to share a little backstory. I think it makes lecture more exciting, and I think that we can still do that. But this finding is encouraging instructors to remember that we're experts in our field. And so we make connections and we make them very quickly that maybe our students don't make. So if you are sharing some content with your students and it draws your mind to something that's peripherally connected, so you go ahead and talk about that thing, it can actually decrease student learning and attention in ways that we wouldn't necessarily expect. Sometimes we think we're bringing in enriching stories and enriching bits of material, but it's actually distracting students from the thing that they need to focus on, which is getting a basic understanding during that lecture. So avoiding tangents can be important. You can bring in fun stories and you can bring in related videos, but you want to make sure that after you've done that, you always check in with students, as Rosa just mentioned. Thank you, Rosa. You want to check in with students that they are getting what they need, and I think it's super helpful if you do go off and bring in some tangentially related information that you ask students if they know why you brought that in. Okay, so I think that is the big point I wanted to share here, is just make sure that you remember that very often, especially with our students, we're talking to novice learners about this content area, and we have to remember that their brains aren't jumping from one area to the next as quickly as ours might be, and that providing them some context can be really, really valuable, and then reinforcing why we're presenting the material that we present. So, if anybody wants to weigh in, again, I am all ears. Oh, Helena. Yes, tangents throw students off. I'm going to try to open my chat window so I can see the whole. I've seen it in their facial expressions. So have I, right? Students are just like, why are they saying that? I don't know what just happened. I thought we were talking about X. Now they're talking about Y. So just be aware of it. And okay, and so Joelle is chiming in with, I find the occasional silly anecdote can help. Absolutely. You know, I'm not saying you can't bring in a video or a personal story, but when you do, after everybody has a good laugh, make sure they get why that was brought in. You know, just clarify, hey, I shared that story. Why do you think I did it? You know, and if they can't make that connection, then you can help them kind of bring it all together. So Nancy is asking, is it better to make the connection to the story for the students or ask the students to make the connection? Listen, in all cases, I'm going to encourage that you let students be contributors to the discussion. And so I would always say, first, I would ask students to make the connection. And you have to work with your class to make sure they can do it in a succinct way so it doesn't take too long. If students can't make the connection, I think it's completely appropriate for us to prompt or to go ahead and give that away. But you've got to be cautious, because if you regularly get into the pattern of answering for them, they're not going to be highly motivated to do it for you. So does that help, Nancy? Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on to finding 4, but you guys can chat in. You can also unmute, however it works for you. I hope that most of you have heard this research by now, because I think it's pretty valuable stuff. Frequent quizzing matters. I encourage people to use low-stakes quizzes so that students get in the habit of believing that it's their understanding that matters, and that quizzing is a way for us to practice retrieving information. Rather than making every test a big deal, you want to show students that, hey, this is just me rewarding you for practice you should be doing anyway. It turns out, this second finding, this practicing retrieval, the act of pushing information into our long-term memory is very different than the act of pulling it out. And students have practiced and practiced and practiced pushing information in through note-taking, through, any number of things, just listening to. I've heard students who will record my lectures and listen to them 3 times. And I say, wow, that's a lot of devotion and a lot of time, but you ought to spend some time practicing bringing things out of your memory in your own words, because that's what I'm going to be looking for when we take tests. So a nice thing about frequent quizzes is it gives your students the opportunity to learn about your assessment style so that by the time they get to a high-stakes test, they feel like they know you and they know what your questions mean and what they ask. But also, it's just the practice with retrieval that I think is super valuable. And you can do this in any number of ways. We've just been talking about how mini lectures are great. And at the Lilly conference I went to recently, I used clickers in my class, but at the Lilly conference, one of the presenters showed us a great low-tech way. She just passes out index cards of different colors. If you've got multiple choice questions, you can give out 4 colors. If you've got true, false, or yes, no, you can just give out 2. But she basically puts the question up on the screen, and then there's multiple answers. And it'll say, if you think A is correct, hold up your pink card. If you think B is correct, hold up your green card. And very quickly, students can hold up. Now they've just practiced retrieving information, and if you see in your class that there's a lot of confusion, everybody's not finding the same answer to be correct, you can ask your students to talk to each other and figure out which answer they think is right. Maybe you'll get a few cards to change. So I really like that. You don't even have to give points, but it is going to give them rehearsal with the practice of retrieval. So I think that's super valuable. So any comments on this one? Let's see, Joelle's just chatted in. Okay, so she's asking, and I'm hoping everyone can see, she had disappointing results for unscored in-class group discussions. You know what, we're going to actually talk about that in the discussion section. Yeah, it turns out that students don't do optional, so points matter. But I have found some ways of getting around it. One of my favorite, when I use clickers, and I suppose you could do this with the cards, I just tell students that they have to respond to be able to earn extra credit. And so I tell them, I don't care, whether you're right or you're wrong, but as long as you're actively responding, I can give you access to the extra credit points that are available in this class. So it's easy for me. I don't have to keep track, and it doesn't affect my grade book that often. But there's that. I'd love to hear more about clickers. What technology does it require? You can pick them up from the Media Center on each campus. We've got a set, and there are different software packages that you can use. So I'd encourage you, after the session is over, I love them, so you can email me and I can send you some info about it, or you can just go to the Media Center. But they're super valuable. I enjoy them a lot. So some folks are liking the colored index cards. You could have students, just use those and then just be checking that you've seen each student use them at least once during the class. And then the group discussions actually work better than the low score quizzes. And that's great because discussion is a practice of retrieval. They have to think and they have to engage. So it's giving you the same quality of retrieval practice. So really, I always think, go with what works for you. I've been reading about them a lot in the teaching literature. Helena, can you clarify, are you talking about the clickers? Okay, clickers, all right. So yeah, they're great. And also, you guys, there are some free clicker services that I could let you know about. One is called Clickers. I'm going to chat it in so that you can see how it's spelled. But I believe it's just clickers.com. Y'all can take a peek. And it's a super cool method. You can type in your questions, you can present them on screen, and then each student gets a card and they tip it in a certain direction. It's basically a QR code. So if you have a phone or you have a tablet, you can just scan the classroom with your camera, and if you're connected to Clickers, it automatically gives a response rate. It'll tell how many people got it right, how many people got it wrong. So it's super cool. And then there's Nearpod. I'll type that into nearpod.com. Nearpod actually allows you to present slides to students on their devices, and then they can click in with their answers. With that one, I always worry that not all my students have a phone, so I tend to use it more for group activities than for, open to the whole class. So those are some ideas on the clickers. Okay, so we have made it to finding number 5. Style and pace of speech can improve learning. I don't think I'm surprising you with this one, but they've actually done research and found a number. So you can try to record yourself and time yourself. 100 words per minute is seen as best. There are declines in student processing when you go above or below. So trying to aim for that. Expressiveness matters. They say monotone is a killer. We all know this. But I do encourage you to just show how much you love your subject, because for most of us, when we're really demonstrating that we love the content, that monotone goes away. You can't be monotone when you're saying how much you love what you teach. I saw, Joelle, a session just on clickers. Yeah, I could do something like that. So if you have ideas like that, please, please, please email me as well, because I may not record all of this, but I will definitely get your emails. So let me know. I think that could be a lot of fun. We actually have some experts in the college who do sessions like this. So I think you might, Herb Coleman, I know, has done them in the past, and I would be happy to join in too. Okay, so the last little finding on here is beware the risks of cognitive overload. PowerPoint is a super tool. I enjoy using it because it just reminds me what I need to say. But I often tell students, hey, you guys, these slides are for me, not for you. They are my notes, so I don't forget to say something. And also it gives you the chance to see correct spelling of interesting terms. But if you write down everything on the slide, it is not going to help you out, because you really need to be listening to what's going on in the classroom. And what we find is if students are trying to focus on the slides, they're often not able to also simultaneously process what's happening auditorially. So we need to give them time. If you've got a very word-heavy slide and you really want them to engage with it, you're going to have to take a minute and say, hey, I'm stopping, read this over, and then we can talk about it. But I'm not going to just talk to you the whole time while a very word-heavy slide is on the screen. So those are some suggestions. So we come to this part. Now, I don't necessarily need you to send me your own ratings, but I've got a method to my madness here. I'm hoping that you'll rate yourself on these 5 best practices in using lecture. So using mini lectures, guided note-taking, focusing on the essentials, frequent quizzing and testing, and style and pace of speech. What I'd like you to do is for each one, and you can just write down somewhere in your notes, the number. So number 1 is using mini lectures, and then rate yourself. Do you think you are not doing this successfully right now, or are you rocking it? Just kind of rate yourself anywhere in there. And you don't have to chat this to anybody else. This is really personal reflection, to just take a minute and think about where we're doing great and where we might improve. And if you want to share an area that you're doing great at and a tip, or if you want to share an area that you might want to improve and ask your colleagues for some advice, I encourage you to do that. And do go ahead and feel free to unmute yourself, because this is a great part for us to actually talk. So.
Or I could just unmute everybody.
Yeah, go ahead. Blant's going to unmute everybody. So now I can hear you. So. Actually, now I can hear you. So go ahead, weigh in. Do you have any suggestions about improving on one of these? Do you need some advice on how to improve? What are your thoughts?
Missy, this is Terry Barksdale.
Hi, Terry.
I see that one of my colleagues has put in, I think it was Helena, put in that on number 2, she would love to hear input on guided taking. And I just wanted to offer that in the, well, now in EDUC 1300, but as well in the Student Learning Success Toolbox.
Oh, yeah.
There's a tab with resources that help students look at different note-taking processes and decide which one works best for them. So if faculty have space in their curriculum, they might choose to have one of the early assignments in the semester be for the students to go to the Student Learning Toolbox, look at the various note-taking options described there, and choose one for themselves that works best for them and for their style of learning.
That's a great idea, Terry. Would you be willing to maybe chat in the URL so that everyone can find it more easily? I mean, it's on the library page, but if you could maybe give them the direct URL right into the Student Toolbox, they can explore that.
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. So what else, everybody? Anyone?
Everyone's shy.
All right, you guys are all being shy.
Hi, this is me. I feel like I have done some of this, but I'm not consistent.
Okay.
I feel like just because I'm just
Oh, I couldn't hear that because you just what?
Just because I feel like I'm still, getting my feet wet, being fairly new to the college. But I don't think I intentionally focus on implementing these. When I go to design my course and when I go to set up my classroom, as far as lectures and activities and group work, I just feel like I do it what feels right and what fits, but not intentionally saying guided note-taking and frequent quizzing and testing. I just kind of built it in just based on I thought that was necessary. But I think there's real value into really intentionally focusing on all of these areas.
I agree. And I think that sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but I have found that I've accidentally fallen into some good teaching techniques. I do some things because they seem to work, but I didn't know that there was research that could back that up. And so I think it's just really valuable to take a peek at what researchers are saying, and then, you can be more intentional, and you can start to think about choosing activities or lecture methods that support these goals that we can agree might make it easier for our students to learn. So I think that's awesome. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Okay, well, I muted everybody again just for that ambient sound. We are now at the part that I'm most excited to share with you guys, and these are called ideas. The authors call them intentionally designed educational activities, so it fits in just perfectly with what Nancy was just saying. And each chapter has, like I said, about 12 to 15 ideas, and the idea is that they are using at least one or more of those 5 best practices, and then they create an activity based on supporting one of those. So I've chosen 4 from this chapter. And we're going to go through these individually, but I thought you'd like to just see what we're going to cover. I've chosen idea number 2, number 3, number 5, and number 8. So we're going to talk about all 4 of these. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do is, as you are hearing about these, for each one, I want you to chat in a rating from, I think I picked 0 to 5 or 1 to 5. Let me see. Sorry, I got behind. Yeah, so from 1 to 5, and you'll see that on your screen in a minute. But 1 meaning, I don't think this would work in my classes, and 5 meaning, I think I could actually use this. And I encourage you, for each of these 4 ideas, keep track of how you've rated each one, because at the end, I'm going to ask each of you to share your favorite one and how you could incorporate it into your class. So hopefully that's clear to everybody. I'll remind you on each slide, but rate it, chat it in, but then also make a note of it so that you can easily at the end figure out which one was your favorite. Okay, so idea number 2 is the pause procedure. And I picked this one because it is actually the basis for all the rest of the ones that we're going to talk about. It's just reinforcing the idea that mini lectures are best. So you lecture for a short period of time, then you give your students a break, and you fill that time in with something that allows them to reflect. So the authors encourage a 30-second to a 2-minute pause for every 10 to 15-minute lecture. You can certainly give more time, but that's sort of like a window. And you can ask students a question at the beginning of the pause, or you can encourage students to come up with their own. And I actually think that's really great advice. If you just ask students to share with you something that they find particularly valuable, or ask them what they think you were aiming at sharing in your previous 15 minutes, or ask a question about something that you found confusing. If you really establish this rhythm of mini lecture and pause, then students realize that their feedback and input is desired and helpful. So that's really the pause procedure in a nutshell. So this one leaves it open to the instructor what they're going to use the pause for. It could just be for student reflection. Hey, you guys, I want you to take a minute and just rehash those notes. Make sure you're clear on them. But you can use your class as a guide and help them learn how to use the pause effectively. Maybe at the beginning of the semester, you're going to have to give them very pointed suggestions about what to do in the pause. But hopefully as the semester goes on, you can say, hey, what did you guys choose to do in that pause? And share it with me and share it with the class. So, gut check. I want to know what your reaction to this is. And again, I'd like you to chat it in. 1, you don't think this technique would be very useful. 5, you think it would be very useful to you. And then just somewhere in your notes, keep track so that you have easy access to that when we get to the end of this section. Okay. So Joelle says she uses it all the time. Helena's kind of in the middle. What about some of the rest of you guys? Okay, so I'm seeing some middling ratings, some higher ratings. And again, the big value here is it reinforces that mini lecture approach. Okay, so cool. All right, so I'm going to go on to ideas. Well, first off, is there anybody who needs more time with this or has some questions about it? Yeah, Nancy's winging it. It's important how you set the pause, especially with new students or early in the semester. You have to explain to them why you're taking that break. Don't just decide to drink some water for 2 minutes with no guidance to your students. Okay. All right, so idea number 3 from this chapter is the punctuated lecture. And this is, again, the pause procedure, but with specific ideas about what to do in the pause. And what I really love about the punctuated lecture is the focus is on metacognition, thinking about thinking. And you use the pause here to really assess and ask your students to assess themselves on how well they are setting themselves up for learning. So much like I asked you guys to score yourselves on some of the other techniques, you can ask your students to score themselves on some good student behaviors during this pause. How many of you were taking notes? Rate yourself. You can ask them what they were doing at the moment. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump over to the next slide just to give you some sample questions from the chapter that you could use in a punctuated lecture to get your students to engage in metacognition. So it's the same procedure as the pause, but now in our pause, you can offer up one of these questions to your students. I really like these. Were you fully concentrating on the lecture when I stopped? What are you doing to record the information? What are you doing to make sure you're making connections? Where in your notes are you recording how this stuff relates to the stuff we've already talked about? And the idea is you don't do all of these at once. You select one for each punctuated pause, and then you give them time to respond. I really like the one about, did you get distracted at any point? If so, what distracted you? It can be super helpful if you've got students who are constantly texting. You might find that some of their classmates will tell them that that behavior is causing them distraction if they're aware. And that can really help you shut that down if you don't have it in your syllabus already. Were you able to bring your attention back into focus? What's the most recent point covered in lecture? I love that one. What is the big golden nugget that you just took from that information? And then you can also ask them to predict, hey, what's happening next? Why do you think I'm going to talk about this next idea? All of these are really focused on making our students better students, getting them to engage in metacognition. Let me jump back to the previous slide. So that's how the punctuated lecture works, and you can come up with your own metacognitively related questions, but then you just go back to lecture after people have had a chance to weigh in. So I want you guys to do another gut check. Again, you can chat in with one if you think it's not really something that would work in your classes, and it really can depend on content, or 5 that you think this could be really valuable, and anywhere in that range. So if you guys will chat in and then make a note of it, I will keep track of what you're saying. So we're getting some moderate ratings, some higher ratings. I do want to just encourage you guys to think about this one. Even if your gut reaction is that it wouldn't work, the research is pretty unequivocal that metacognition is a learned skill, and that for students to be successful, they have to be effective at metacognition. So it's one of the things that in my courses I push over and over again. I'm constantly asking them, how are you going to study for this? How are you going to remember this later? What are you going to do to make this meaningful to you? Have you converted it into your own words? And I encourage you, if you haven't tried those kinds of things, to consider doing it, because our students don't come to us with super metacognitive skills a lot. And given what the research says about how for our students to be successful, they have to be good at metacognition, I think it's great to try to encourage that. So I'm looking. Okay, so by topic, some of you are saying that these questions might not be appropriate, but I'm thinking, Carla, you say you teach nursing. What if you said, how are you going to cue your ability to do this process in a real life situation? You know, if you've just taught a technique or something about dosing, students need to remember that in a high pressure situation that they're not necessarily going to have their notes right there or be able to remember. So encouraging them to use a mnemonic device or some kind of memory technique so that they'll be able to pull this information up when they need it, I think that that could help. All right, well, great comments.
This is Terry again.
Hey,
And I wanted to share a very interesting but brief encounter that I had in the library last semester that was startling but enlightening at the same time.
Okay.
It was in October. We were approaching the midterm season, and there was a student who approached me in the library. I was just walking through on my way to lunch or something, and he approached me and said, I have a midterm in 2 hours. Can you teach me how to study? And I just wanted to cry. But I thought, okay, he wants help, and I'm happy to try. And so I said, you know, forgive me while for just a moment I sound like your mother and say the time to learn to study is not 2 hours before your midterm, but I'm going to do my very best to support you. And so then I asked him what type of exam he was studying for, and it turned out to be in the health sciences. And he described a little bit more about the particular exam. I gave him a strategy and told him how I would encourage him to spend the next 2 hours that he had in order to prepare for that exam. And I thought and then I went and got him some books that he could take with him for an extended study of how to study. But I thought it was a terrible situation where that poor child was going to have a miserable experience, but he sought me out the next week to thank me and to tell me that he'd scored the highest grade in the class.
Wow.
And that
tells you something, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If a student who had just spent 2 hours, like, that was the best. Yeah, I hear you. I think that we often forget, because most of us who are in education, we were good at this stuff. We loved studying. Somebody taught us how, or we figured it out. And so we often forget that these questions that seem like a no-brainer to us might be news to our students. And the one thing I'll say about the student you mentioned is at least he knew, right? He knew he didn't know how to study. And that is a place where not all of our students are even at that point.
I agree. And I also think that it was valuable to me to realize that it may not always be about his grasp of the content, but reminding him of an approach that gives him confidence in his grasp of the content. And so I know for sure that there's no way that he made the best grade in the class because of the 2 hours of studying he did. But that studying process helped remind him of what he already knew, and kind of polished his preparation for the exam. So it was an interesting moment that made me go, holy crap, I shouldn't prejudge when a student seems to need a little extra support, the way I was ready to do for that young man. So thank you for letting me comment.
No, I appreciate that. That is really great. And it's just a good reminder that we're not all in the same place and we all have different skills, but whenever we can share something that has worked for us with the student, I think it's a benefit to them. I just love that. Okay, so let's see. I feel it's more distractive going back and forth from the lecture topic to analyzing internal mental activity. I think this is best done at the end. And Rosa, that is a totally fine view. Research suggests that giving people time to assess how they're performing is the way to get them to perform better. If I don't assess myself, I think I'm doing it right. And if I wait till the end of the lecture, it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to recall at which points I got distracted an hour and 15 minutes ago. So it's fine to do it at the end of lecture, but I'm going to encourage you guys to remember that the research on attention is pretty clear. We do not do our best work if we keep going. I use a timer to never allow myself to go more than 25 minutes without a just brief refresher break. Stand up, shake it off. Our brains don't work for 45 minutes straight. So that's why I encourage you guys to consider this. And just remember that just because we think we know how these things would work, sometimes we're not, I tell my students this all the time when I teach about thinking and memory. Humans are pretty terrible judges of what it takes to learn. And a lot of what we hear comes from research that supports these ideas that seem completely nonsensical to us. One of my favorite bits of research is that interleaved study is better than trying to study one topic nonstop. Intuitively, we think, oh, no, I should study Spanish for 2 hours, and then I should study something else for 4 hours, and you should never switch back and forth because it's harder, and we feel challenged and uncomfortable by it. And so intuitively, we think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we study for 20 minutes on one topic and then 20 minutes on another and then switch to another. But the research is pretty clear that that is the best way to do it for us because it is challenging and it is harder and it keeps our attention. So I think those kinds of things are, just think about it. You don't have to build it into your classes, but be aware that, and I'm guilty of this too, we're not great judges of what it takes to learn. So I encourage you to think about that. So, mini lectures, yes, absolutely. You keep on topic and then you can do these breaks in between. So I've got 2 more of these that I want to share. Oops. share with you interpreted lecture. And these are going to be pretty quick to go through because still it's a pause procedure. But with interpreted lecture, what you do instead of asking them to assess their metacognition or just giving a general break, you prepare the students ahead of time, and then you tell them you're going to call on a student to interpret the lecture for the rest of the class. So you lecture for 10 to 15 minutes, then you randomly select somebody, you warn them ahead of time, so hopefully they're taking good notes. You say, all right, Joe, you're going to be up. I'm going to give you about a minute to figure out what you want to say so you can write something good down. And while Joe is taking this time, hey, everybody else in the class, why don't you write some things that you would say if you'd been called on? Because if Joe needs some help, I'm going to ask you guys randomly to join in. So essentially, you ask them to translate the 15 minutes of conversation that you've just had into a couple of sentences in plain English, not using lofty terms. This is great because it makes students process and put things in their own words, which is a much deeper level of engagement with material than if they don't. You've got the benefit of everybody in the class can feel like, oh, if I get called on, there's going to be people to help me. They also know that they're going to have time to process and think. So I really like this technique called the interpreted lecture, and I'd love to get your thoughts. Again, do a quick gut check. If you have questions, let me know. I can clarify, but 1 would mean I don't think the interpreted lecture is for me, and 5, it would be extremely useful. Okay. All right, so people are saying that I'm getting a couple of 5s, that you ask for opinions as well, and too much anxiety. You know, Helena, I will show you some research in the next section that kind of blew my mind about that anxiety aspect, and we can talk about that. But I think I had the exact same initial reaction to this one, that it could scare students and they might be really, really nervous. One thing I'll say, there are techniques that can eliminate some of that anxiety. One of my favorites, and maybe you've heard me talk about this before, is the red card, green card. I read about this and I love this idea. You give students cards at the beginning of class. Red, if they put red up, it means whenever you've brought up a topic, they don't feel ready to discuss that. They don't have what they need to be successful, so they're saying, do not call on me. Yellow means you can call on me if you have to. I'll try my best, but I'm not thrilled about this topic. And green means I'm awesome. I got this. Ask me whatever. And so as you do the interpreted lecture method, you could say, hey, everybody, stick up your cards, and I will only call on green or yellow. Or I'll call on green for the first part, and then I'll ask for some support from yellows. So those can help avoid some of that anxiety. All right. So Nancy agrees, we need to think about how to do that effectively without scaring students. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And Russia says, that's what we're doing right now in this class. Yeah, I'm asking you guys to share with me. Joelle asks everybody how large their classes are on average. Generally, we're capped at 36 here, but there are classes, especially technique classes, that can be lower. Like I teach one that's capped at 25. But if you guys want to chat in, do about what are your average class sizes. Okay, so let me do the last idea, and then we're going to take a couple of minutes to see if you guys can think about how to use these in your classes. You'll pick a favorite. So this last one is called Take a Guess, and it is basically something that you can do. It's almost like bingo is the way I think about it. Before a lecture, you ask students to create a bingo card. And given what the reading was ahead of time or what the previous class was, you ask them to write a list on a separate sheet of paper of 3 to 6 things they assume are going to be talked about during class. And then you tell them to keep that visible during the entire lecture. You can do this with mini lectures or a great big long lecture. And then you ask them to play bingo with themselves. They get to circle every time you actually cover a topic that they predicted. And then at the end of lecture, you reserve a little time and you have a conversation about what's happened. You can ask them to do it on their own, or you can ask them to reflect as a group, but they should pay attention to where they were right and where they were wrong. Were you dead on? Are you a good predictor of what's going to be covered? Were you prepared enough from the reading to handle this task? Or were you totally out in left field? Because I promise you, if we know what's coming, we do a better job of processing it than if it's all brand new material. And so this can be something that you can use to guide your students through that process. One of my favorite parts of this one is ask them to talk about what do you have on your list that we didn't cover? Because sometimes if a student did the reading and they thought, wow, this is a key point, I know we're going to cover it, now they're left feeling like, is this going to be on the exam? Is this important for the class? Why didn't you cover that? And this gives them the opportunity to engage in that conversation. And perhaps you could say, I didn't cover it because the book did a great job. I didn't need to spend time. Or I didn't cover it because I don't find that all that valuable. Whatever it is, you can now have a conversation and students will feel like they have a better sense of why you've used class time the way you have. Again, I encourage you to gut check, rate your reaction to this one. And if you have questions or thoughts on it, please chime in. Okay. Yeah. And Marissa says she likes that idea if they've read, and this is actually a really kind of low-stakes way to make sure that they have read. You can say, I'm going to pick those up at the end of class, and I'll give you a couple points if you at least were able to write down some good topics. Yep. And Joelle says, will they do it if I don't police it? I'm going to say again, students, don't do optional. If you set up your class and you never insist on them demonstrating that they have read, they are not going to read. So pre-class quizzing is one thing that I've done before, a ticket into class. A student has to write at least one thing that they picked up from the reading. There are low-stakes ways to demonstrate to your students how super important it is that they read before class. And I find one of the most effective things is just telling them that. I've had many students whose minds were blown when I said, no, the reading on the syllabus, that's what you do before class, not after class. You have to be ready to participate. You need that information and that background. Some students really are blown away by that idea, and then they do find that it's helpful. Okay, so we've got a few minutes. Joelle says she does that speech. How do I motivate them to do the reading if you can't offer extra points? You can make it part of your class points. If you're talking about a class where you've got the points already allocated, it's a good question. I think one thing you can do is just model it. And I heard somebody say once, embrace the crickets. If students come to class unprepared and they can't participate, you can just sit there for a couple. I mean, it'll feel like a time waste, but you can just say, this is us wasting our time. If you aren't prepared, we can't accomplish what we need to in this class. And just really explaining it. Terry says candy. Yeah, I do use liberal amounts of chocolate and nerds. I find them to be very, very effective. So those are great ideas. So what I want to do, one of my coworkers had them earn a breakfast party since the class was early in the morning, so something like that can be fun. You guys, I've gone to Party City and I bought some of those little party favors. I gave away bubbles. They were so excited. They were super cheap and they were thrilled when I'd throw bubbles at people who were prepared and they were like, what? I got bubbles. So there's that. I love y'all's ideas. Pizza party. So let me get at least a couple of people to weigh in. I'm going to get Valon to unmute everybody for a minute and maybe share one of these, how you think you could tweak it to be effective in your class. And we're running a skidge behind, so we probably won't all have a chance, but I would love to hear from a couple of people who have the wheels are turning. What do you guys think?
I'm trying to think of a way to take the guess idea and turn it into an assignment somehow that would encourage them to do their readings, but also wouldn't put a giant extra grading load on myself. I don't mean to sound lazy, but my classes are so larger. So, yeah, I'm really intrigued about, I like the whole bingo idea, and I'm trying to think of an idea of how to implement that in a way that's sort of fun, gets them to do their readings, and that could be rolled into their participation grade as well.
Yeah. So, you know, if you do it like a bingo, you can, I've heard it recommended that you just pick them up at the end of the class. It doesn't have to be a huge grade, but if you see a student couldn't write down anything, you know, maybe they don't get the participation points for that day. So Belon just had to mute everybody because somebody had some audio going in the back. So, but please just unmute yourself. But yeah, the idea is they don't have to be labor-intensive grading. I really love the ticket into class and the ticket out of class option. I think those are super quick and they can be done easily. Anybody else? What other suggestions?
You know, I really like, this is Helena right here. Hi.
Hi, Helena.
Hi. So I am still kind of stuck on this punctuated lecture idea. I really love it. I think it's just terrific to give students some tools for evaluating their own learning processes. And I'm thinking it might be useful to actually, you know, pose a certain question a few times to just get the students into the habit of asking that question and hearing their peers share their responses may give them some ideas about, you know, how they can learn or how they can think about their own learning. And so I think I'm choosing number 3 here.
All right, all right. Yeah, I like the idea of trying to get students to pick up tips about how to be better students throughout the semester. And I have in the past done something like this when students did poorly on an exam. I made them talk together about what they had done to study and whether it was successful or not. So just those kinds of questions that you can ask that give them the chance to really process how they're learning, they can be valuable. So I like that. I'm glad that you think that's got some promise, Helena.
Yeah.
So anybody else have one that they want to share that they're excited to try or that they have an idea about how they might use it effectively in their class? Oh, pause. Oh, Carla, sorry, you texted in. Carla says she likes the pause procedure. She inserts a multiple choice question, and that can be really great because it gives the chance that, you know, the students a chance to actually see if they process the material well, gives them practice with retrieval. I've used pause, and it's one of my favorites. I ask students to write their own multiple choice question. I can pick those up at the end of class, and I'll tell them if I find a really good one, I'll put it on the exam. But giving students practice with writing multiple choice questions is super deep processing and really, really valuable. Sometimes I just tell them, okay, after you've written your multiple choice question, share it with a classmate. So now you've got 2 questions that you've asked, and you have to be able to answer your peer's question as well as your own. So I like that idea, Carla. That's great. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and move on, even though I would like to have more chatting, but I think that we're going to have a bit more time on the discussion methods because there's only 3 to cover. So I'm going to bounce through discussion methods of Chapter 2. So the big deal here is instead of just trying to convey information here, you're trying to get students to use it and integrate it and process it and share. I did want to pay homage to the fact that, yes, discussion is always going to take longer. If you have a set of goals that you have to just really push through, you're going to get it done faster with lecture than with discussion. But again, remember back to what we said, just because you've shared it doesn't mean it's been internalized or processed or understood. So the benefit here is by hearing how your students are processing as they discuss, you can help them. You can make sure the understanding is what you're hoping. You can give them feedback on how to do it better or clarify. So I think that that's kind of the big deal with the discussion method. I'm going to bounce through the next 2 slides. Oh, Lord, that was the worst PowerPoint in the history of the world anyway. So, yay, you didn't have to see it. But I'll give those to you later. So some best practices. We'll go through, again, this is where the book gives us 5 findings. Active preparation for discussion improves learning. That's a no-brainer if ever I heard one, but I can hear from what you guys have already been asking about, getting students to prepare ahead of time is no small task. So, but you have to. If you're going to use the discussion method and you do not want to just sit there waiting for comments, you have to get your students actively prepared. And so one of the things that the chapter really focuses on is if you rescue your students from discomfort too early, they will never believe that they have to be prepared. So you may, at one point in the semester, have to let them feel the burn. You know, just let them feel that discomfort of nobody is ready for this. And even call them out gently, like, you guys, this is a place for scholars. You have to do your work. I cannot force this information into your head, and for this class to work, you guys have to prepare. So I encourage you to think about that. Finding 2, and this one I think makes sense as I process it. Students benefit more from small group discussions than from whole class discussions. Now, of course, whole class discussions have benefits too, but the idea is that students who are not entirely comfortable sharing with a huge group of people may find their voices in smaller groups. So that is something super valuable to be aware of. And the research suggests that there are gains made in small groups over whole class, and that those gains are even more pronounced in students of diverse ethnic backgrounds. So given the diversity of our student body, we probably just need to pay a little attention to this finding, that we might want to spend some time in small groups rather than whole class. Finding 3, grading participation improves participation in discussion. Yikes! But as we've already heard, we don't have a ton of time. So coming up with ways that we can quickly grade or quickly assign points to students becomes super important. I mentioned the ticket in and out of class. Those are some things that can be valuable. I love this idea that the book covers on tokens. You can give out tokens at the beginning of the semester or at the beginning of an exam cycle and challenge students to, you have to turn in a token to be able to talk, and at the end of this period, you have to have used all your tokens. If you haven't, then you lose points. So you can give points in that way. And then some people say, rather than giving participation points, you can just exchange tokens for extra credit. So after students, and then that way it can work in the reverse. You can give a student a token each time they participate, and after they've collected a certain number, then they get a certain prize. You could do it with points, you could do it with, you know, bubbles. So if there's any questions, please chat in. I'm not seeing any movement on the chat right now, but so far we've gotten through our first 3 best practices. So finding 4, comfort with discussion and class community improves the level of student learning. So the idea is, and you guys are clearly alert to it, you already mentioned the idea of anxiety and not wanting to cause too much anxiety in our students. That does matter. If students feel comfortable in class, they feel comfortable with the way discussion works, they're going to get more out of it. And so I think that's super important to keep in mind. And you can do things in class to improve the comfort level. We already mentioned that red light, green light kind of thing where students know they're not going to be called on unless they've got a green or a yellow. That can make them feel more comfortable. Practicing discussion, sharing with students, hey, we've got to get our feet under us. Our first couple of discussions are probably not going to be the best of the semester, but that's okay. Let's talk about how we do better and better. Demonstrate for them how discussion looks. Give them time in small groups and walk around and say, oh, wow, you guys are really contributing equally. Or I love being able to see that you guys have all, you know, prepared ahead of time. I hear that you guys are doing a great job. So you can insert some lessons on how to behave in a discussion and how to prepare, and that'll improve comfort level as well. I just saw a chat. Wondering about external motivation versus internal motivation when you're awarding points and tokens. That's from Nancy. It matters, right? But the research that I've seen on internal versus external motivation is pretty clear. If you reward somebody for something they were already super motivated to do, you could decrease their internal motivation. But when you reward people for stuff they weren't motivated to do, it will actually increase their external motivation. So do I want externally motivated students? No, but quite frankly, a lot of time it's what we've got. And if you can challenge them and get them excited about learning, you can try to help improve their internal motivation. We largely have no power over that. All we can do is change their level of external motivation. So I'll say, if you've got a class that's already discussing and they're on fire and they don't need any push, don't give tokens, right? But if you've got a class that's reticent and they're not participating, throw tokens at them. It's not going to hurt anything. So Sandra recommends, hey, I want to hear from students who haven't spoken up so far. That can be a great prompt because it encourages other people to participate and it gives them a moment to find their voice too. I think sometimes students are so used to hearing from others that they don't necessarily engage. So I think that's a great idea, Sandra. So let me cover the last finding and then we will talk about some ideas, those tips for teaching. This one was a mind blow for me. You guys, my whole teaching career, I have worked super hard not to get students scared. And I basically promised them, I will never call on you unless you raise your hand. I have said that in my classes. The research is pretty clear that that is maybe not the right way to proceed. Cold calling is just when you call out a student and you ask for them to participate. Cold calling actually, and the more you do it throughout the semester, the more voluntary participation you wind up getting. That is so counterintuitive to me, I don't even have words. So I think a lot of us have focused on voluntary participation. Talk if you want. But the research suggests that the more cold calling you do, the more likely students are to actually volunteer. And that as the semester goes on, if you continue to cold call, you're going to get more volunteers. I find that to be so surprising. But given that it's been researched and we've got some good evidence on it, it's worth a try. And you can give students a decreased level of anxiety by telling them when you're about to call on the class. You know, if you've been lecturing for 45 minutes and then you go, Steve, tell me what I just said. That's terrifying. But if you tell everybody, all right, I've been talking for a while, my voice needs a break. In about 30 minutes, I'm going to pick on Steve. Now Steve has a warning. He's been cold called, but he has some time to prepare and think, and it really can decrease the level of anxiety. And you can give the students a way to back out. You can say, hey, if you don't feel prepared to discuss this, you get to phone a friend. Ask somebody else who's really excited to participate. Ask them to share with you what you ought to say, and then you can say what they suggested. So I think that those are some interesting findings that might be valuable to you guys. So take a minute. I'll give my voice a rest. If you guys want to chime in, you can. But this is, again, just a self-rating, just for you. You do not have to chat in. But I want you thinking about the way you're running your class now. Are you engaging in these kind of best practices? Do you have some area to improve there? And then I'll give you some suggested techniques that you can use to hopefully bolster your skills. So if you guys will just chat in or let me know when you feel like you've had time to assess yourself, that'd be great. All right, so far I've got one person chiming in that they're done. Oh, we got two. Okay. All right, so I'm seeing most of you guys are finishing up. And Sandra says she doesn't have a clear system to grade participation, but she does care about it. And I think that, you know, is the first step. Once you have an idea that something might be valuable, then you can investigate how to do it. And I always find that my colleagues are such a wealth of information. And so I encourage you to, you know, ask a question at a department meeting. Hey, do you guys grade participation in discussions? And if so, how? And how do you do it without killing your work-life balance? You know, those kinds of things can be really valuable. All right, so we're going to talk now about ideas, those intentionally designed activities to improve discussions. We're going to do 3, and then I'm gonna actually try to do these pretty quickly so that you guys can share, because we're pushing it for time, and I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. So we'll do what if, we'll do think, pair, share, which is kind of an oldie but a goodie, and then we'll do seated discussion. So, okay, what if? And remember, this is a discussion. This one takes a little preparation ahead of time. The idea is that you are going to ask your students to engage in hypothetical reasoning. So you can examine an actual event from the news, maybe if you can connect your class to some current events. Or I know we had some nursing folks in here. You could give them a case study of a medical situation, and then you present that to them, and then either you pick one variable to change or you ask your students to come up with a variable to change, and then you ask them, what would have happened if this one thing had been different? So what would have happened if instead of having a blood pressure of this, the person had a blood pressure of that? What would have happened if during the Republican debate a person had said this instead of that? So you're really just challenging your students to make a real world connection instead of just focusing on memorization of material, to see if they can think flexibly about information. So the way this works is you have to tell students how it's going to work ahead of time, otherwise they won't be prepared. You give them some preparation time. You can put your case study up on a screen, you could pass it out for them to read on their own, or you could give it to them the day before. But you do have to give them some time to get themselves clear on the example. And then the authors suggest that you do this in small groups and let the small groups talk about how they think things would change, and then you bring them all back as a whole class and debrief and ask them, you know, hey, could you come up with another variable that would be cool to tweak? Or do we all agree that the outcome would have been the same if we tweaked this one variable? So you give them some time to engage in small groups and then as a whole class. So I'd love to know what you guys think about this one, the what if, engaging your students in some hypothetical reasoning about an example that you prepare. So you can rate yourself how likely you would be to use this, 1 to 5. Not getting anybody in. Yeah, are you seeing chat? Oh, you guys, I didn't scroll. Well, thank you for not leaving me hanging. I didn't scroll. Wonder how I could use this in art history. What if the artist had used red rather than blue? Yeah, I think that would be super cool. I think the book covered art history, and they said something about what if the lighting source had been coming from above instead of below, those kinds of things. So that could be a lot of fun. All right. So idea 15.
I have an idea about art history.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
What if Picasso had been born in 1950? What would his art be like?
Ooh, I love that, because you're really making them connect to other artistic movements that would have followed or preceded. That's a great one. Yeah. So I think this one's got a lot.
There's certainly no right answer for it.
And that's a great thing, right? Sometimes students need to hear that divergent thinking is valued, that all these possible answers are valuable. So,
I'm feeling that. Thank you.
I love that. Okay, so in interest of time, and you guys, I am demonstrating horrible teaching techniques. Please be kind. I'm really trying to push through because I'm so excited to share these things with you guys. But these slides will all go out to you, and if you have questions or if I can reinforce any of these, please let me know. Think, Pair, Share is a great way to increase confidence in students' ability to engage in discussions. And I love it because it's a technique that takes no preparation whatsoever. If your students look like they're falling asleep on you or confused, you can just pull it out of your back pocket at any time. And so basically what you do is you ask a discussion question, but you tell everybody first, we're going to do a think. So here's your question. Everybody think about it by themselves for 1 to 2 minutes. And they have time to write and take notes and work out their thoughts. Then after they've done the think component, you say, all right, now turn to one of your neighbors and in a pair, tell them what you thought, they should tell you what they thought, and you have just a brief discussion. If each student has about 1.5 minutes, they can get their point across. And now they've done the pair component. And then the last is the share. And at this point, you invite pairs who are excited to give their thoughts, or you can cold call, whichever you prefer, because they've had time to prepare, and it's not really a cold call because they knew that they were going to get asked. But you can ask them to share what their pair talked about. So it's Think, Pair, Share, super easy. It takes, less than 10 minutes. You give students time to think about a problem on their own, then you get them in groups of 2 to discuss it, and then you bring them to the whole class and you have them share out. So I'd love to know what you think about this one. Many of you probably heard of it before, but I do love it because it can be used in so many situations. You could use it with a what if. You could come up with a challenging question, or you could get a student to provide a question, and then everybody do Think, Pair, Share. But it's super fast, and it gives time to break up the lecture and have a good discussion. So yeah, variation of small group work that you already do. And again, that's one of the nice things, it's increasing comfort with the discussion technique. Love it. Yeah, Joelle is pointing out that especially for people who are introverted or people who are feeling a little less confident or assertive, this gives them time to prepare their response before they're jumping in the deep end. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. All right, so one more, and I will stick around with you guys if you want for a little bit after, but I want to try to get to the end so you guys can leave if you need to. This one's the seated discussion. And essentially, this might help those of you who are wondering how to get students to read or get students to prepare. You basically provide them with the discussion questions ahead of time. And I would encourage you to do it the day before class. So the idea is, hey, it's class today, I'm giving you a reading assignment, but along with the reading assignment, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 questions that I'm going to bring up in our next class. So when you go home, now you have a reason to read because you know you're going to be expected to respond to these questions, but you also know what the questions are, so it gives you a sense of confidence as you prepare. You're not just trying to figure out what you ought to be focusing on or what might be important. You really guide students to direct their attention to the things that you're going to be bringing up in the next class. And then when they come to class the next day, you can do it in small groups, you can do it as a whole class, you can do Think, Pair, Shares on it, but you can cold call and then allow for some volunteers. But the idea is everybody came to class armed with the information that they knew that these things were going to be discussed. And it can be really valuable at the end for you to share your thoughts and like, hey, here's why I picked those discussion questions. Or you can ask students, why do you think I picked those? Why do you think I thought those were valuable? So do you guys feel like you have a good sense of this? And if so, check in about how you might feel about this activity. So Rosa likes this one. I've also seen people do it in class. So if you have people that you know are relatively strong readers, you can give them some material in class to read and give them the discussion questions, or you could alternatively do a mini lesson, but prior to starting the lesson, you tell them some questions you're going to ask them at the end. So they're listening to the lesson, trying to figure out how they're going to respond. Nah, not my fave. Some people are really liking it, but that's okay. That's what I love about teaching, is it's so personable and personal. And you want to try to, for a smorgasbord, you know, have a bunch of approaches, and some you're going to love and some you're going to hate. So Joelle thinks she might try to do this with the weekly textbook reading. Cool. All right, so we do not have a ton of time, but let me hear it. Joelle's already weighed in a little bit, but if Falon will unmute, anybody want to share something that came to them about how they could use one of these ideas?
I took this last April, so I haven't done most things on.
Yeah. I think Courtney's unmuted. So anybody want to share, or if you're already doing one of these things, or if you have a suggestion? That's okay. I know we're pretty close to the end of time. All right. Well, thank you for. Oh, idea 20 is my favorite. Seated discussion. Carla says, "What if I pose a point situation? Think, pair, share. Same thing. Pose a point situation. I don't think I understand. If you can clarify, Carla, that would help me out." Oh, patient. Well, of course, nursing. I wasn't thinking. Yeah, absolutely. And Nancy says she likes to do the what if and seated discussions. She already is using think, pair, share. Cool. All right. Well, you guys, like I said, I'm going to stick around here, and if any of you want to talk a little bit more about some ideas or bounce some ideas off of each other, I would love to do that with you. But I do want to just make sure that you guys have some closing here. First off, if you love this, please tell some people. You should have gotten a flyer like this. If you want, email me and I can send you some more and you can pass them on to your colleagues, or we're also going to email reminders. You can forward them to people who you think could benefit from this. If you hated it, just tell me. Don't tell everybody else. Just tell me that part. But I would like to know your thoughts. Normally in workshops we do paper evaluations. Obviously we can't do that here, but I've created an evaluation online and I'll be sending that out to you by the end of this week, I think. And it'll come and it'll say something like Computerside chat evaluation. So when that shows up in your inbox, please, please, please take the time to evaluate that, and you'll have a password, so it'll be totally anonymous. And if you are willing to share with me your thoughts about how this went for you, if you have suggestions for next time, I would have liked a little bit more time. I should have given you guys a bit more time to converse with each other. That's my biggest feedback to myself. But do shoot me an email at fctl@austincc.edu, because I love hearing about how to improve, and we've got a bunch more of these on the calendar, so I want to make each one as good as possible. Oh, the next one, chapters 3 and 4, we're going to be covering peer teaching and academic games. Those are the two chapters. There's one on Tuesday, March 1st from 3 to 4:30, and then there's a Thursday, March 31st from noon to 1:30. So Tuesday, March 1st from 3 to 4:30, and Thursday, March 31st from noon to 1:30. So that'll be the next one on chapters 3 and 4. Will we get a reminder? Absolutely, I will. I will, yeah, we will definitely send basically this out to everybody again. So the email that you received that had this information last time, it'll go out again. All right, please send a flyer. Oh, great, Marissa, I will absolutely send you some flyers. Thank you very, very much. Oh, show them the FCTL website. Courtney is telling me I need to show you the FCTL website, but oh, you know what, if I do this, it's gonna show you my email. Ah. Well, hold on, you're getting all of the goods. Here we go. For those of you who don't know, and that edu. Gosh, I can't see, sorry. This is our website, austincc.edu/FCTL. It'll come up in a second. And we've got all kinds of programs, so you can take a peek. We really try to focus on sharing between colleagues and really taking some time to think about what we're doing in our classes so that we can learn from each other. So that's really what all of our stuff's about, and I'd love for you to find yourself to our website and give me some thoughts on what's working for you, because this is a grassroots project. We got the administration to say, yes, we could have a budget for us to spend time learning from each other, and that's really what the FCTL is all about. So look for those evals. I thank you so much for your time, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next chat. And if you have questions or thoughts, I'm sticking around, so I'll try to stay for at least the next 5 minutes, but if everybody leaves, I will go. So.